That night, I drove my daughter to the airport for what I thought was just another routine work trip. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until my grandson, who's only 7 years old, suddenly grabbed my hand really tight. His eyes were wide with this intense panic, and it just froze me right where I stood. In a shaky voice he whispered, "Grandma, please don't let us go back to the house. I overheard Mama planning something bad against us this morning. You gotta believe me." In that very instant something inside me just broke. Without even questioning him, I jumped in the car and took off with him into the dark night. But before we go any further, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories go. My name's A.R. Binham, and I'm 70 years old. Up until that night, I thought I knew my daughter Candace like the back of my hand. I've been living with her and my grandson Devin ever since my son-in-law Reggie passed away 3 years ago. It was a car accident that left a deep scar on all of us, especially little Devin, who's become a really observant and quiet child ever since. That Thursday, we drove Candace to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport for a business trip she was taking to Chicago. She's a marketing manager at some big company and travels pretty often. We got there early. The terminal wasn't too crowded, and the icy air conditioning just made me want to pull my thin coat even tighter around me. "It'll only be 3 days, Mama," Candace said with a smile, as she adjusted her carry-on bag. "Take good care of Devin and don't forget his medication." Devin, who was standing right beside me, was clutching his dinosaur backpack like his life depended on it, just watching his mother with these really intense eyes. He's never been one for a lot of chatter, but that night he was quieter than usual. "Everything's gonna be okay, my love. We always make it work, right, Devin?" I tried to bring my grandson into the conversation, but he just nodded silently. Candace crouched down in front of her son and smoothed the hair that was falling over his eyes. "Be good for Grandma. Go on, Mama. I'll be back soon." She kissed him on the forehead, and Devin just stood there like a little statue. I watched my daughter and my heart swelled with pride. Despite everything she'd been through, she'd become such a strong, independent woman. After losing her husband, she just threw herself into work with even more determination. Maybe it was her way of dealing with the pain. I really admired her resilience, even though I'd started noticing a certain emotional distance growing between us. "I gotta go," she said, checking her watch. "Boarding starts in half an hour." We gave each other this quick hug, just this mechanical embrace without much warmth, which was something that had become pretty common between us lately. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her bag and headed toward the gate. We just watched her silhouette get smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the crowd. "Let's go, Devin. It's getting late," I said, taking my grandson's hand. We walked down the terminal corridor towards the parking garage. Devin didn't say a single word the whole way. His silence didn't really worry me. It was just how he was. Ever since his father's accident, he seemed to communicate more with his eyes and his gestures than with actual words. The parking garage was really dimly lit. There were just a few yellow lamps that cast these shapeless shadows on the concrete floor. Not many cars were parked there at that hour. I hit the alarm button on my key, and the lights of our old Chevy Impala blinked. I started walking toward the car, gently pulling Devin along by the hand, and that's when I felt it, this strong, almost violent pull. Devin had stopped dead in his tracks and was gripping my wrist with so much force that his little fingernails were leaving marks on my wrinkled skin. I turned around totally confused. "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, bending down so I was at his level. Devin's face looked really pale in the yellowish light of the pole. His eyes, which were always so watchful, were now wide with pure terror. I had never seen that kind of expression on his little face before. A chill ran right down my spine. "Grandma," he whispered so softly that I had to lean in close to hear him. "Please don't let us go back to the house. Please believe me." I just stood there, totally confused, thinking maybe he was just scared of being in the empty house without his mother. "Don't worry, my love. We'll be fine. Just the two of us for a few days." He shook his head really hard, gripping my wrist even tighter. "No, Grandma. Don't go back to the house," he repeated, his voice starting to crack. This morning I heard Mama on the phone in the home office. She was talking about us. My heart started pounding in my chest. What did you hear, Devin? He swallowed hard, his lips trembling just a little. He leaned in even closer to my ear. Mama said after we fell asleep that everything was ready. She said, "Make sure there aren't any mistakes. The gas has to look like an accidental leak." My blood ran cold in my veins. I just stood there, paralyzed, staring at those innocent eyes that were now carrying the weight of this terrible secret. "Please, Grandma." His voice was just this shaky little thread. "Believe me this time." That last sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. I started remembering other times Devin had tried to warn me about things. Like when he said he saw his mother hiding papers in the office, or when he mentioned that she'd spent all night messing around with the kitchen pipes. I'd always just brushed it off as stories from a kid trying to get some attention. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I didn't want to believe it. It just seemed impossible that Candace, my own daughter, could be plotting to kill us. But the sheer terror in Devin's eyes was just too real to ignore. "Okay, baby," I whispered, gently stroking his pale cheek. "I believe you. We're not going home tonight." The relief in his eyes was immediate and so intense that it just erased any lingering doubts I might have had. He knew. Somehow, this 7-year-old child had uncovered this horrific plan. I stood up on shaky legs. My mind was racing. If what Devin was saying was true, we couldn't just go to a hotel or a friend's house. Candace could easily track the credit card or just call everyone we knew. I got into the car with Devin, helped him buckle his seatbelt, and then I sat down behind the wheel. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Devin asked, his little voice breaking the tense silence. I had no idea. I looked in the rearview mirror at his worried little face and tried to sound as confident as I could. "We're going somewhere safe, sweetie. I just need a minute to think." I started the engine and slowly backed out of the parking spot. We needed time. We needed a plan. And more than anything, we needed to figure out why my own daughter would want us dead. I drove for almost an hour without any real destination in mind, just trying to get further and further away from our house. Devin ended up falling asleep in the back seat, just completely exhausted from all the emotions. I kept glancing at him in the mirror every now and then, his face looking so peaceful in contrast to the sheer terror he'd shown in the parking garage. How could a child so young have to carry such a heavy secret? As I drove through the increasingly deserted city streets, my mind was just working overtime, trying to connect all the dots. Candace had definitely changed in recent months. There was no denying that. She was more distant, more impatient, and always locked away in the home office, talking on the phone in these hushed tones. I had just chalked it all up to grief, work stress, and the pressures of being a single mom. But now, as I started recalling every detail, every strange look, every interrupted conversation when I walked into the room, a really sinister pattern started to emerge. I pulled the car over at a 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of the city. We needed a plan and I really needed to clear my head. I bought a cup of watery coffee from the convenience store and went back to the car, watching Devin, who was still sound asleep. Just then my cell phone started vibrating in my coat pocket. Candace's name lit up on the screen. My heart just leaped into my throat. Her flight should have taken off hours ago. Why was she calling? With trembling hands I answered the phone. "Hello." "Hey, Mama." Candace's voice sounded strangely calm. "Where are you? You should have been home an hour ago." A shiver ran down my back. How did she know we weren't home? "Oh, we decided to stop for dinner." I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Devin was hungry. There was silence on the other end of the line. "I see. And where are you having dinner?" "At that restaurant near the shopping center," I replied vaguely. "Shouldn't you be on the plane?" "There was a problem with the flight," she said quickly. "It got rescheduled for early tomorrow. I'm heading back home now." I just froze. That didn't make any sense. Candace always checked the flight schedules so carefully. She would never let something like that happen unexpectedly. "Oh, that's too bad." I replied, trying to sound as natural as possible. Well, we'll see you at home later then. Yes, of course, she said, her voice suddenly sounding really sweet. Don't worry about rushing. Just enjoy your dinner. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I hung up the phone and just stared at it. It was a trap. She was just trying to see if we'd figured anything out. Maybe she had cameras set up at the house. Or maybe she realized that Devin had overheard her that morning. Devin stirred in the back seat, slowly opening his eyes. Was that Mama? He asked with a perceptiveness that really scared me. I nodded, unable to hide the truth from those watchful eyes. She said the flight was canceled. She's coming back home. Devin's eyes went wide with terror. She knows Grandma. She knows we found out. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in my hands. Devin, I need you to tell me exactly what you heard this morning. Everything. Every single detail. He sat up straight, smoothing out his wrinkled t-shirt. He looked so much older than his 7 years as he started to speak. Mama woke up really early. I heard her in the hallway, and I thought she was going to make breakfast, but she went to the office and closed the door. He hesitated, looking down. I know I shouldn't have, but I went over there and listened behind the door. It's okay, sweetie. Just keep going. She was talking really low, but I could hear some of it. She said, yes, they'll be alone. 3 days is enough time for it to look like an accident. The gas leaked during the night while they're sleeping. Nobody will suspect. Devin paused, taking a deep breath, and then he said something about papers and insurance money. She said, once they're out of the way, I can finally access everything. A shiver ran through my body. Insurance papers. Suddenly, everything started to fall into place. About 6 months ago, my late husband Reggie had left all the documents for this pretty substantial life insurance policy. Candace knew that I was the primary beneficiary, but there were these specific clauses that set aside a considerable portion for Devin, which he could only get when he turned 21. Candace was the fund administrator, but she couldn't actually touch the money. Not while I was still alive. There was also the house that belonged to Reggie and me, and which, after he died, went entirely to me. Candace lived with us, but the property was mine, and it was constantly increasing in value as the neighborhood grew. Devin, I asked, my voice trembling, did you ever hear your mother talking about money or Grandpa's insurance before? He nodded slowly. Lots of times. She always gets really angry when she talks about it. Once I heard her say on the phone that she was stuck because of us. Every word felt like a knife in my heart. My own daughter was plotting to kill us for money. It was so unbelievable, so monstrous that my mind just refused to accept it. But all the evidence was there. The change in her behavior, her sudden interest in financial matters, the constant questions about my will, the business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. And now this fake canceled trip. She wanted to catch us off guard. She wanted to make sure we'd be home sleeping when the accident happened. What are we going to do, Grandma? Devin asked, his small voice bringing me back to reality. I looked at this extraordinary child who had sensed the danger before I did, who had saved our lives with his sharp observation and courage. First, we're going to get even further away, I replied, starting the car engine again. And then we're going to get evidence. Evidence? Devin asked, confused. Yes, sweetie. Proof that shows your mother is planning something terrible, something we can take to the police. Devin nodded gravely. This wasn't the kind of conversation a grandmother should be having with her grandson. It wasn't a weight any child should have to carry, but we were in this together. It was just the two of us against someone I never would have imagined as an enemy. As I drove through the night, an idea started to form in my mind. It was a risky plan, but it might give us the proof we needed. Devin, I said, looking at him in the rearview mirror. Do you remember Mr. Harrison, the doorman at our old apartment building? He nodded. Wallace Harrison was an old friend. This discreet and reliable man who had worked for decades in the building, where we used to live before we moved into the house. I think we need to pay him a visit, I said, steering the car toward the old neighborhood. It was a gamble, but at that point we didn't have many other options. We needed a safe place to spend the night, and more importantly, we needed help to expose Candace before she could try something again. The car's clock read 1:20 a.m. When we finally got to the old building, my heart pounded as I parked on the side street, away from the building's security cameras. If Candace was really looking for us, we couldn't risk leaving any clues. "Stay here for just a minute, Devin," I said, turning off the engine. "Grandma's just gonna go check and see if Mr. Harrison's working the night shift." I got out of the car and walked quickly to the security booth, staying in the shadows. The booth was lit up, and to my relief there was Wallace Harrison, his face bent over a crossword magazine. I tapped lightly on the glass and he looked up, confused at first, but then surprised when he recognized me. "Mara," he said, standing up and opening the booth door. "What are you doing here at this hour?" "Wallace, I'm so sorry for showing up like this," I said in a low voice, looking around nervously. "But I have a really serious problem. I need your help." The small staff apartment in the back of the building was simple but cozy. Wallace had lived there since his wife passed away 10 years ago. It was a tucked-away space with its own entrance, hidden from anyone who didn't know the building well, which made it perfect for what we needed: a temporary hiding place. Devin was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping on some hot chocolate that Wallace had made him. The old doorman watched us with concern, still trying to process the unbelievable story I just told him. "Mara," Wallace finally said, his voice breaking the silence, "are you sure about this? This is a really serious accusation to make against your own daughter." I sighed heavily. "I know, Wallace. It sounds like something out of a movie. I don't even want to believe it myself." I looked over at Devin, who was still staring at his cup, but I can't just ignore what Devin heard, and there have been so many other things I've just brushed aside and am just connecting now. Wallace nodded slowly, rubbing his wrinkled chin. He'd known our family for decades. He'd seen Candace grow up. He'd even cried at my husband's funeral. "So what do you plan to do, Ms. Era?" he asked. "We need proof," I replied, my mind still focused on the plan that had started to take shape in the car. "If we go to the police now with just the testimony of a 7-year-old and my own suspicions, they're not going to take us seriously. Candace is well respected. She's got a good job. They'll just say it's a misunderstanding, or worse, that I'm just getting old and losing it." Wallace frowned, but he didn't disagree. He knew I was right. "And where do I fit into all of this?" he asked. "I need to go back to the house," I said, feeling Devin tense up beside me. "Not to stay, just to look for some evidence. I need to figure out exactly what Candace was planning. And I need Devin to stay here safe and sound while I do it." "No, Grandma!" Devin exclaimed, slamming the mug down on the table. "It's too dangerous. Mama might come back." I took his cold little hands in mine. "I know, sweetie. But I promise I'm going to be really careful. I'm just going to take a quick look in her office and see if I can find any clues. I'll be in and out before she even knows I'm there." Devin shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't want you to go. And I don't want to stay here all alone." "You won't be alone," I reassured him. "Mr. Harrison will stay with you, and I promise I'll be back before you know it." "You shouldn't go alone," Wallace said, his face etched with worry. "If what you're saying is true, it's just too risky." "I don't have a choice," I replied. "If Candace finds out that we know something, she could destroy any evidence, or worse, she might try something even more direct." I shuddered at the thought. I need to act now, while she still thinks we don't suspect anything. Wallace sighed, running his hand through his gray hair. "At least let me drive you there. I'll wait in the car on the corner. If you're not back in 20 minutes, I'm calling the police." I nodded. It was definitely better than going completely alone. "I want to go too," Devin insisted. "No, sweetie," I said firmly. "It's way too dangerous. I need you to stay here and be safe. I promise I'll be back." After more pleading, Devin finally gave in, but not before he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Promise you'll be careful, Grandma," he whispered in my ear. "Promise me." "I promise you," I replied, kissing him on the forehead. Wallace lent us an old burner phone, the kind that doesn't require registration, so we could communicate without using my phone, which Candace might be able to track. We agreed on a code. 1 ring and a hang-up meant I was okay. 2 rings meant I was in trouble. After making sure Devin was comfortable on the small sofa bed in the apartment, with strict instructions to lock the door and not open it for anyone but us, Wallace and I left, both of us feeling heavy-hearted about what I was about to do. The dashboard clock read 1:53 a.m. When we parked about a block away from my house, the streets were completely deserted, with just a few lampposts casting long shadows on the asphalt. "I've got a bad feeling about this, Miss Era," Wallace murmured, turning off the engine. "Are you sure you really want to do this?" I swallowed hard, staring at the dark silhouette of my house at the end of the street. All the windows were dark. There was no sign of Candace's car in the driveway. "I don't have a choice," I repeated, more to convince myself than him. 20 minutes, just like we agreed. "If I don't come back or call the police." Wallace nodded solemnly. "God protect you." I got out of the car and walked quickly down the sidewalk, sticking to the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure anyone within shouting distance could hear it. The house was silent as I quietly used my key to unlock the back door. I closed it softly behind me and stood still in the dark kitchen, listening intently. There was nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick-tock of the living room clock. I took out the small flashlight I'd brought and shone it on the path to the hallway. I needed to get to Candace's office on the 2nd floor without making a sound. Every floorboard that creaked under my feet felt like thunder in the silence of the house. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. There was a strange smell in the air, something sweet and chemical at the same time. I sniffed again, trying to figure out what it was. It wasn't gas. It was something different, something that shouldn't be there. Climbing the stairs felt like it took forever, each step carefully placed to avoid the ones that usually creaked. On the 2nd floor hallway, I stopped in front of Candace's office door. It was locked just as I expected. I took out the hairpin I had stashed in my pocket. Years ago, when Candace was a teenager and would lock herself in her room during her tantrums, I had learned how to pick simple locks like this one. I never imagined I'd be using that skill in a situation like this. After a few tense minutes, I heard the satisfying click of the lock giving way. I slowly pushed the door open, praying the hinges wouldn't squeak. Candace's office was just as organized as always. Shelves lined with books on management and marketing, a dark wood desk with a closed laptop, a leather swivel chair. Everything in its place. I closed the door behind me and began my search. The laptop was password protected, so I focused on the physical documents. I carefully opened drawers, looked through folders, and checked every corner for anything suspicious. It was in the 3rd desk drawer that I found something. A red folder, different from all the others, hidden under a pile of company documents. Inside were bank statements I'd never seen before, accounts and names I didn't recognize, large money transfers to someone named M. Sellers, and most alarmingly, a copy of my life insurance policy with handwritten notes in the margin about its value and payout clauses. My heart pounded in my chest. It was real. Everything Devin had heard was real. My own daughter was planning to kill me. A noise from downstairs broke my train of thought, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. I froze, the blood chilling in my veins. Candace was back. I quickly grabbed my cell phone and dialed Wallace's number. 2 rings. Then I hung up. The signal for trouble. Immediately, I started taking pictures of the most incriminating documents with my phone's camera. There was no time to look through everything, but I needed to get as much evidence as I could. I put the folder back exactly where I found it, and hid behind the office door, turning off the flashlight. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. It didn't sound like Candace's usual firm, hurried walk. This was more cautious. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I was trapped. If I left the office, I would be seen. If I stayed, I would be found when Candace came to work in the morning, or worse, if she decided to come into the office now. The footsteps stopped in the hallway. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door. A shadow moved under the crack, blocking the faint hallway light. Someone was out there standing still as if listening. I held my breath, feeling cold sweat trickling down my back. The door handle slowly began to turn. The office door opened a few inches with an almost imperceptible groan. I stayed motionless, pressed against the wall behind the door, barely breathing. The darkness was my only ally. A silhouette appeared on the floor of the office. It wasn't Candace. The height was different, taller and broader. A man. The shadow stood still for a few moments, as if whoever it was listening intently. Then Candace's voice came from downstairs. Muffled by the distance, a voice called out, "Marcus, is everything clear up there?" My heart skipped a beat, then seemed to stop completely. Marcus. That name. The same name that was on the bank statements. Sellers. "Just checking," the voice had said. A deep male voice answered, surprisingly close, just a few feet away. "The house is empty. No sign of them. I told you something was wrong." Candace's voice, now laced with irritation, sounded even closer. "They should be here. The plan was for tomorrow night, after I got back from the trip. Now the timeline is all messed up." Candace's footsteps started up the stairs. I was cornered, trapped between two people who were clearly plotting my demise. My only escape route was the office window, which opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking the backyard. It would be a dangerous fall for anyone, and potentially deadly for a 70-year-old woman. "I said involving the kid was risky," the male voice continued, now moving away from the doorway toward the hallway. "Kids are unpredictable. He might have overheard something." "Impossible," Candace replied, already in the hallway. "Devin never wakes up before 7, and I always talk in the office with the door closed. Besides, even if he did hear, who would believe a 7-year-old? A dull thump came from downstairs, followed by a muffled curse. "What was that?" Candace asked, her voice alarmed. "I don't know," Marcus replied. "I'll check it out. You keep getting her room ready." The man's footsteps quickly retreated down the stairs. Candace lingered in the hallway for a few more seconds. Then I heard her footsteps heading toward my room at the end of the hall. My mind raced. Her room. Getting my room ready. What exactly were they doing? And what was that noise downstairs? Wallace must have arrived at the house after receiving my trouble signal. My dear old friend trying to help was now also in grave danger. I slipped out from behind the door, moving with exaggerated slowness to avoid making any noise. Peeking through the crack in the door, I could see that the hallway was empty. Now on tiptoes, I cautiously approached the office window. I needed to get out of there, get somewhere safe and call the police. Not only was my own life in danger, but so were Wallace's and most importantly Devin's. I opened the window with extreme care, trying to avoid making even the slightest sound. The ledge was even narrower than I had imagined, barely a foot wide. Below, a 20-foot drop ended on the relative softness of the backyard grass. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't even consider such a risky maneuver. But desperation is a powerful motivator, and these were far from normal circumstances. I carefully put one foot outside, immediately feeling the cold morning air. I had to gather all my courage and strength to put the other leg through the window and balance precariously on the narrow ledge. My joints protested with every movement. Arthritis is no joke at 70 years old, but fear gave me an agility I didn't even know I still possessed. Suddenly, I heard agitated voices coming from downstairs. A dull thud was followed by a groan. My heart clenched as I instantly recognized Wallace's voice. They had caught him. "Who else is with you, old man?" Marcus's rough voice echoed through the house. "How did you even know to come in here?" I couldn't hear Wallace's response, but the sound of something heavy falling made me shudder. I closed my eyes for a moment, silently begging my old friend for his forgiveness. I couldn't help him now. Our best chance was for me to escape and get help. I started moving sideways along the ledge. Inch by inch, my back pressed tightly against the wall, my fingers clutching the rough texture of the siding. Sweat poured down my face despite the cold morning air. There was a lattice covered in ivy on the corner of the house. If I could reach it, maybe I could use it to climb down to the garden. It was a calculated risk, but still far less risky than jumping straight down from the ledge. "Candace, I found someone," Marcus shouted from inside the house. "An old guy trying to sneak in the back way." "What? Who is he?" My daughter's voice sounded distant, coming from my room. "He won't talk, but he seems to know your mother. She must be nearby." I froze on the ledge, every muscle tensed. They knew I was in the house. The search would intensify and time was running out. I no longer had the luxury of caution. I had to act and act fast. With a surge of adrenaline, I reached for the lattice and began to climb down, ignoring the pain in my aching joints and the scratches from the rough wooden stakes. I half slipped, half climbed the last few feet, landing awkwardly on the grass with a dull thud that sent a jolt of sharp pain through my left hip. There was no time to dwell on the pain. I staggered to my feet and ran as quietly as I could across the backyard toward the low wall that separated our property from the Miller family's house next door. As I scurried through the shadows of the trees, I heard the office window being opened violently. A flashlight beam swept across the yard, almost catching me in its glare. I ducked behind a large bush, holding my breath. "Is anyone down there?" Marcus's booming voice echoed through the night. "I'm going to check. Keep the old man tied up." I scrambled over the wall with great difficulty, tumbling onto the other side into the Miller's yard. Our elderly neighbors, fortunately, were both heavy sleepers and away on vacation. I ran across their perfectly manicured lawn, skirting the house, feeling a sharp twinge in my hip with every step. When I reached the parallel street, I was already gasping for breath, my lungs burning. But fear kept me going, pushing me forward. I ran as far away from the house as possible, sticking to the shadows until I reached a main avenue where a few bars were still open, their patrons milling about on the sidewalk. I fumbled in my pocket for the burner phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. As I waited for someone to answer, I quickly checked the photos I had taken of the documents in the office. The proof we so desperately needed was all there, preserved digitally. "Police, what is your emergency?" The operator's calm, professional voice came through the phone. "My name is Bingham," I said, struggling to control the tremor in my voice. "I need to report an attempted murder. My daughter is plotting to kill me and my grandson for the insurance money. She has an accomplice, and they just captured a friend of mine who tried to help me." There was a noticeable pause on the other end. I could practically hear the operator's thoughts. Just another paranoid old woman imagining conspiracies. "Ma'am, where are you right now?" he asked, his tone professional but cautious. "On the I-85 service road, near the 500 block. I'm running from my house. Please, I need you to send patrols to 237 Magnolia Lane. My friend Wallace Harrison is in mortal danger." "Do you have any proof of these accusations?" "I have photographed documents and a witness, my 7-year-old grandson, who overheard my daughter planning everything." I hesitated for a moment, then added, "I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Please, there's no time to lose." As I spoke, a patrol car slowly cruised down the avenue. I waved frantically, still holding the phone to my ear. To my immense relief, the patrol car stopped. 2 police officers got out, approaching me with cautious expressions on their faces. "The police are here," I told the operator. "I'm going to explain the situation to them." The next few minutes were a blur of hurried explanations and frantic gestures. I quickly summarized the situation to the officers, showing them the photos of the documents on the phone. I mentioned Devon, hopefully safe in Wallace's apartment, and Wallace's own perilous situation, possibly injured and being held hostage in my house. Something in my urgency, or maybe the undeniable evidence I presented, must have convinced the police that I wasn't just some delusional old woman. One of them spoke into the radio, urgently requesting backup, while the other helped me into the back of the patrol car. "We'll rescue your friend first," said the older officer, a man whose face was etched with the lines of years of dedicated service. "Then we'll go find your grandson. Can you give us the exact address of where he is?" I provided the address of the old building, and gave them detailed instructions on how to reach the staff apartment. My biggest worry now was that Candace and her accomplice realizing I had escaped, might somehow figure out where Devon was. Would she remember Wallace, our long friendship, and make the connection? The patrol car sped through the nearly deserted streets at that early hour of the morning, the city still mostly asleep. 2 other patrol cars followed us, their sirens silent, only their flashing lights cutting through the darkness of the night. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached my house. "There's an entry through the back," I explained to the officer. "The kitchen door. Wallace must be downstairs." We stopped at a safe distance from the house. The police officers instructed me to wait in the patrol car, while they quietly surrounded the house. I watched anxiously, my hands twisting in my lap, as they positioned themselves strategically, communicating via radios. It felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then everything happened very quickly. A sudden burst of controlled chaos. I heard the police officers shouting, "Freeze!" followed immediately by the sound of breaking glass. A door slammed violently, then more shouts, a loud crash, and finally complete silence. Minutes later, I saw Wallace being helped out of the house by 2 officers. My dear old friend was limping and had a visible cut on his forehead, but he was alive, thank God. I felt such immense relief wash over me that tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. Almost immediately after, Marcus was brought out in handcuffs, escorted by 2 officers. He was a hefty man with elaborate tattoos covering his arms and a furious, hate-filled expression contorting his face. I waited, my heart pounding with dread, for Candace to appear, but she didn't. The older officer approached the patrol car where I was waiting. "The house is clear, ma'am, but your daughter isn't here." It seems she fled out the back when she realized we'd arrived. A chill ran down my spine, colder than anything I had ever felt. "Devon," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We need to get to my grandson before she does." The patrol car sped through the night at full speed, siren blaring, finally breaking the silence of the morning. This time I sat in the back seat, my hands clasped tightly together, twisting with anxiety. Beside me, Wallace, wearing a makeshift bandage on his forehead, seemed equally worried. "She didn't know where we were," he said, trying to calm my frayed nerves. "I didn't mention the apartment when they caught me." But I couldn't be calmed. A dark premonition was growing stronger in my chest with each passing second. Candace was incredibly smart, and she knew my old friends, my old habits. If she remembered Wallace, she might easily deduce where to look for Devon. When we arrived at the old building, my heart nearly stopped beating altogether. The service door leading to the staff apartment was slightly ajar. "Stay here," the officer ordered, drawing his weapon. But I couldn't obey. I practically leaped out of the patrol car and ran after him, ignoring his shouted protests. Wallace followed me, limping as fast as he could. The hallway was dark and eerily silent. The apartment door was closed, seemingly untouched. The officer knocked 3 times, his knuckles rapping sharply on the wood. "Devon," I called out, my voice trembling with fear. "Devon, sweetie, it's Grandma. Are you there?" Only silence answered, a heavy silence that pierced my ears like sharp needles. The officer tried the doorknob. Locked. He stepped back a little, took a deep breath, and then lunged forward with his shoulder, knocking the door open with a loud crash that echoed through the building. The apartment was dark, the air thick with tension. The officer entered first, switching on his flashlight, followed closely by Wallace and me. He quickly swept the small space with a beam of light, searching for any sign of Devon. The kitchen was empty, spotless. The living room, with its familiar sofa bed, was messy, but also deserted. "Devon," I called again, panic rising in my throat, choking off my breath. That's when I noticed something odd on the sofa bed. Something that made my blood run cold. A torn piece of paper was caught under an empty paper cup. I picked it up with trembling hands and read the message scrawled in hurried, childish handwriting. "Mama found me. She said she needs to protect me from you, that you're crazy and making up stories. I'm scared, Grandma. Help." My knees buckled, giving way beneath me. Wallace caught me before I collapsed completely to the floor. "She took him," I murmured, my voice stunned and barely audible. Candace had taken Devin. The officer immediately radioed in the dire news, reporting the kidnapping of a child. Within minutes, a full-scale operation was being mobilized. Detailed descriptions of Candace, her car, and Devin were being broadcast everywhere. Roadblocks were being set up on all the city's exits, and alerts were being issued on major highways and at the airport. But deep down I knew it wouldn't be easy. Candace was meticulous, a planner. She had likely been planning this for months, carefully laying the groundwork for her escape. She certainly had escape routes prepared, possibly fake documents, and she knew Devin better than anyone else. She knew exactly what to say to manipulate him, to make him cooperate, even if only temporarily. I was taken to the precinct along with Wallace, where we both gave detailed statements to the detectives. I showed them the photos of the incriminating documents, recounted everything Devin had overheard, and explained about the life insurance policies and Candace's ever-increasing greed. The sergeant, a middle-aged man with dark circles under his weary eyes, listened to everything attentively, without interrupting. Contrary to my initial fears, he didn't dismiss me as a confused, paranoid old woman. The evidence was simply too strong, especially after the capture of Marcus, her accomplice. Marcus's statement had already begun to corroborate my story. "He's cooperating to reduce his own sentence," the sergeant explained. "He confirmed that your daughter hired him to simulate a gas leak that would kill you and your grandson in your sleep. He was to be paid with a portion of the insurance money." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I heard the confirmation of that macabre plan. "And what about Devin?" I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. "Do you have any leads yet? Anything at all?" The sergeant hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "Not yet, but we're monitoring all routes out of the city. Your daughter won't get far." But I wasn't so sure. The hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity, and every moment without news only amplified my anguish. Sitting in the sterile precinct waiting room with an untouched cup of lukewarm tea, I felt myself aging even more rapidly. Wallace sat silently beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand in a gesture of solidarity. His face reflected worry, but also a quiet determination. "We'll find him, Ms. Era," he said after a long silence, his voice filled with conviction. "Devin is a smart kid. He'll find a way to leave us clues, something to help us find him." I nodded, trying desperately to cling to that fragile hope. Devin truly was an extraordinary child. His keen perception and sharp intelligence had already saved us once before. Perhaps they could save him again. Suddenly, I remembered something I had overlooked, something Devin had mentioned to me just days ago. Something about Candace and a special place. "Wait," I said, sitting up straight in the chair, my eyes widening with realization. "I think I know where she might have taken Devin." Wallace and the officer who happened to be passing by the room both looked at me expectantly. 2 weeks ago, Devin mentioned that Candace had taken him to see a surprise house, a place in the country a few hours away from the city. He was excited because there were animals and a lake. At the time I just assumed it was a day trip, nothing more. The sergeant was called in immediately. I explained my suspicion. Candace might be preparing this place as a safe house, a place where she planned to flee after the accident that would supposedly kill us both. "Do you know where this property is located?" the sergeant asked, his voice urgent. "Not exactly. Devin mentioned it was near a small town. I think the name was something like Willow Creek or Cedar Ridge, something like that." It wasn't much to go on, but it was a clue, the first real lead we had. Investigators immediately began checking property records for recently acquired or rented properties in towns with names like that within a radius of a few hours from the city. Meanwhile, I received some alarming news. Candace's car had been found abandoned at a gas station on the highway heading west. She had probably switched vehicles, making the search even more complicated. The clock on the precinct wall read 5:30 in the morning. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten slightly, the first faint hints of dawn. I hadn't slept in almost 24 hours, but the adrenaline and the crushing fear kept me wide awake and alert. Suddenly my phone, which had been returned to me after the forensics team had examined the photos, vibrated in my pocket. An unknown number was calling. I answered it, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. "Hello, Grandma?" Devon's small, scared voice made my heart leap with joy and a fresh wave of fear. "Devon, sweetie, where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he whispered. "Mama's sleeping right now. I found her phone and hid it so I could call you." "You are so brave, my love," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring as I frantically signaled to the sergeant, who quickly called a technician to trace the call. "Can you tell me where you are?" "It's a house in the country. It has a lake and lots of trees. We came by car, but it was a long drive and I slept a little. When I woke up, we were already here. Do you see any signs? Any name nearby? I can't look out the window right now. Mama might wake up," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She's different, Grandma. She says weird things. She says you want to hurt us." "Don't believe her, sweetie. I'm doing everything I can to find you." There was a brief silence, then a slight sound of movement. When Devon spoke again, his voice was even quieter, barely audible. "There's a mailbox at the entrance. It says Riverwood Ranch, Highway 142. My heart pounded. It was the clue we desperately needed. "Devon, you are amazing," I whispered. "Now listen closely. Find a safe place to hide. The police are on their way, but it might take a little while. You need to stay away from your mother. Do you understand?" "I understand. There's an old barn behind the house. I'm going to hide there." "That's perfect, sweetie. And Devon," I hesitated, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "I love you so, so much. Everything is going to be all right." "I love you too, Grandma," he whispered. Then in an even quieter tone, barely a breath, "She's moving. I have to hang up." The call abruptly dropped. I jumped to my feet, relaying the information to the sergeant. Within minutes, a massive operation was being organized and put into motion. The State Highway Patrol was alerted, and troopers were dispatched to the area. The highway heading west had several ranches and properties located near Highway 142, but a place called Riverwood Ranch would be relatively easy to locate. "You must stay here," the sergeant said firmly as the officers made their final preparations. "We'll go get your grandson and arrest your daughter." But I simply couldn't wait, couldn't sit idly by while Devon was out there alone, facing the terrifying realization that his own mother was capable of harming him and his grandmother. He needed to see a familiar face when he was rescued, to know that he wasn't alone. "I'm coming with you," I said in a tone that admitted no argument. "I can wait in the patrol car, far from the danger, but I need to be there for Devon." After some initial resistance, the sergeant finally agreed, but only on the strict condition that I remain a safe distance away until the situation was fully under control. Wallace, despite his injuries, insisted on accompanying me. "I promised the boy I'd protect him," he said simply, his eyes filled with determination. And so, at the first light of dawn, we set off westward in a caravan of patrol cars, sirens silent, only their lights flashing urgently. The sun was slowly rising on the horizon, painting the sky with breathtaking pink and golden hues that contrasted sharply with the darkness that filled my heart. During the long journey, I couldn't stop thinking about what had driven Candace to this point. What series of events had led her down this dark path? My sweet girl whom I had cradled in my arms, whom I had watched take her first steps, say her first words. How had she transformed into someone capable of coldly plotting the deaths of her own mother and her own son? Money was certainly a significant part of the answer, the motivating factor behind her actions. But there was something else, a deep-seated coldness, a disconnection from reality that I had watched grow over the years. Perhaps it had all started after my son-in-law's tragic death. Or perhaps the signs had been there much earlier, subtly present, and I, blinded by a mother's unwavering love, had simply refused to see them. These bitter and painful reflections accompanied me throughout the journey as I watched the familiar urban landscape gradually give way to open fields and small rural properties. When we finally reached Highway 142, my heart was pounding in my throat, threatening to choke me. A discreet sign, almost hidden among the trees, indicated the entrance to Riverwood Ranch, a narrow dirt road that wound through the dense foliage until it disappeared around a bend. The police stopped the patrol cars just before the entrance to avoid alerting Candace to their arrival. From there on, they would proceed on foot, silently surrounding the property. "Wait here, Miss Layla," the sergeant said in a firm but kind tone. "I promise you we'll bring your grandson back safely." I nodded, resigned to my fate. Wallace reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly, offering silent support as we watched the officers move away in tactical formation, disappearing silently among the trees. The minutes that followed stretched out, feeling like the longest of my entire life. Sitting in the patrol car, I strained my eyes, desperately trying to see something, anything beyond the dense barrier of trees. The police radio crackled occasionally with coded communications that I couldn't understand, adding to the growing tension. Suddenly we heard a distant shout, followed by agitated voices and then the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. That single shot echoed through the tranquil morning like a thunderclap, making my heart stop for what felt like an eternity. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct, I threw open the patrol car door and started running down the dirt road, ignoring Wallace's shouts behind me. "Miss Era, come back." But I couldn't wait any longer, couldn't stay put. Devin was in there somewhere, in danger. My grandson, my light, the only person who truly mattered in my life. I ran as I hadn't run in decades, ignoring the sharp pain in my injured hip and the burning sensation in my lungs as I gasped for breath. Age and physical limitations seemed to have vanished, driven away by the raw, overwhelming power of fear and desperation. Wallace came limping along behind me, struggling to keep up. "Don't expose yourself," he whispered urgently. "The police know what they're doing." But I couldn't stand still, couldn't remain hidden any longer. With every second that passed, the situation seemed to grow more volatile, more dangerous. Candace was visibly unstable, her eyes wide and wild, the hand holding the gun trembling slightly. That's when I noticed Devin looking directly toward the old barn behind the house. His eyes darted back and forth as if he were trying to communicate something to me, sending a silent message. I followed his gaze and noticed a police officer silently positioning himself behind the barn, moving into position to flank the house. I understood what Devin was doing, even in the midst of this terrifying situation. He was consciously distracting his mother, keeping her focused on the front of the house while the police quietly positioned themselves in the back. Even in that incredibly stressful and dangerous situation, my 7-year-old grandson was actively cooperating with the police, displaying a courage and intelligence that left me speechless. "Candace," I called out, taking a cautious step forward, ignoring Wallace's desperate tug on my arm. She turned sharply, her eyes blazing with anger, the gun instantly pointing in my direction. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You," she hissed. "How did you escape? You should be dead in the fire." "There was no fire, Candace," I replied calmly, taking another step. The police tensed but didn't interfere, realizing I was buying time. "Your plan failed because Devin overheard everything. He saved our lives." Candace's face twisted into a mix of rage and disbelief. She looked at Devin, who held her gaze without blinking. "You," she whispered to her son. "You betrayed me." "He didn't betray anyone," I said, continuing to advance slowly. "He just protected the person he loves, just as I always tried to protect you." She laughed, a jarring, almost hysterical sound. "You suffocated me, always controlling my life, my money, my dreams. When Dad died, that money should have been mine." "The money was never the problem, Candace," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Your father wanted you to live on your own merits, not dependent on an inheritance. He loved you. I love you." "Lie," she screamed, the hand holding the gun visibly shaking. "If you loved me, you would have given me what was rightfully mine." In that moment I realized that nothing I said would convince her. Greed and resentment had corroded her mind for years, perhaps decades, transforming her into someone I barely recognized. "Let Devin go," I pleaded, now only a few feet from the porch. "He has nothing to do with this." It's between you and me. I saw a flash of something, hesitation, perhaps even guilt, cross Candace's face. For a brief moment it seemed she considered my plea. It was in that instant that Devin acted. With a quick movement that took everyone by surprise, he bit the arm holding him and lunged sideways, rolling off the porch. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. Candace screamed in pain. The gun fired, the shot going wild into the air, and police officers advanced from every direction. I ran the last few feet to the porch, ignoring the police officers' shouts to stand clear. All I could see was Devin huddled next to the railing, trembling. I reached him at the same moment the police officers tackled Candace, forcing her to the ground and handcuffing her. She screamed and struggled, unrecognizable in her fury. I hugged Devin with all the strength I had left, feeling his small body tremble against mine. He was alive. He was safe. "Grandma," he whispered, clinging to me. "You came." "I will always come, my love," I replied, tears finally rolling freely. "Always." Over Devin's shoulder, my eyes met Candace's as she was led away by the officers. For a moment, mother and daughter looked at each other across the insurmountable chasm that now separated us. There was no longer rage in her eyes, only a desolate emptiness. The woman I had known, my daughter, seemed to have completely disappeared, leaving only a shell of what she was. And then she was gone, taken to the patrol car. I focused entirely on Devin, on the miracle of having him safe in my arms. The sun now shone high in the sky, illuminating my grandson's tear-streaked face. I ran my hand through his hair, amazed by his courage. "How did you know she was planning that?" I asked softly when we were sitting in the ambulance that had arrived to check us out. "How did you manage to figure out her plan?" Devin bit his lower lip thoughtfully. "I always wake up early, Grandma. Mama thinks I sleep in, but I actually just stay still in bed thinking." I smiled, stroking his face, so observant, so attentive to everything. "That morning I heard her on the phone," he continued. "She was talking differently, like she was mad but trying not to show it. I went to the hallway and listened by the office door. The paramedic finished checking Devin's vital signs and gave us some privacy, moving away to talk to the police. She talked about the gas and about us sleeping." Devin lowered his voice, "and she said she wanted Grandpa's money, that she was tired of waiting, and that it was going to look like an accident." He looked at me, his eyes suddenly older than his age. I knew no one would believe me if I told them. Adults never believe kids when it's something important. That last sentence broke my heart. How many times had he tried to warn me before with small observations that I had dismissed as childish imagination? "But I believed you at the airport," I said softly. A small smile lit up his face. "Yes, you believed me when it mattered." I hugged him again, feeling immense gratitude for this small being whose extraordinary perception had saved us. The sergeant approached us, his face showing a mix of relief and concern. "Devin and you need to go to the hospital for a full checkup," he said. "Afterward we'll need detailed statements, but that can wait a little." I nodded, grateful for his sensitivity. "Candace," I hesitated, still unable to fully process what my own daughter had become. "What's going to happen to her?" "She'll face serious charges," the sergeant replied, keeping his voice low so Devin wouldn't hear all the details. "Attempted aggravated murder, kidnapping a minor, illegal possession of a firearm, among others. With the accomplice's testimony and the evidence you collected, the case is quite solid." A profound sadness engulfed me, not for the Candace of now, the person who pointed a gun at me and used her own son as a shield, but for the girl she had been, for the daughter I had raised with so much love. "Can I see her before they take her away?" I asked, surprising even myself. The sergeant hesitated, assessing my state. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "I need that closure." He nodded slowly. "I'll check, but it will be brief and supervised." I turned to Devin, who was observing our conversation intently. "Sweetie, I need to talk to your mother for a minute. Will you be okay here with Mr. Harrison?" Devin hesitated, a flash of fear crossing his face. "She's not going to hurt you again." "No," I reassured him. There are police everywhere. We're safe now. Wallace, who had remained discreetly by our side the whole time, stepped forward. We'll be just fine here, champ. Your grandma will be right back. Devin nodded reluctantly, letting me walk away. The sergeant led me to one of the patrol cars parked in the shade of a tree. Candace was sitting in the back seat, handcuffed, her gaze lost in space. When I approached, her eyes slowly focused on me. There was no longer fury in them, just an immense weariness and something that seemed for an instant like shame. Can I talk to her? I asked the officer guarding her. He nodded, opening the car door but remaining watchful beside me. Candace, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Why? She held my gaze for a few seconds before lowering it to the floor. You would never understand, she murmured. Try to explain, I insisted. I owe it to Devin. I need to understand how you could plan to kill your own child. A spasm of pain crossed her face. I wasn't going to. She hesitated as if realizing the absurdity of what she was about to say. At first it was just about you, the insurance money, the house. I was drowning in debt, Mama, more than you could imagine. And Devin, she swallowed. Marcus said we needed to include him, that 2 deaths from a gas leak would be more believable than 1, that if only you died, the police would immediately suspect me. Her voice failed. I tried to argue that we could just send him away to boarding school, something like that. But Marcus insisted it was all or nothing. And you agreed, I said, not as a question but as a painful realization. Candace didn't respond. Her silence was more damning than any confession. Do you realize what you did? What you almost did? My voice now trembled with contained emotion. Devin is going to grow up knowing his own mother plotted his death for money. What kind of scar will that leave on him? Tears began to stream down Candace's face. I couldn't tell if they were of genuine remorse or just self-pity. I wasn't thinking clearly, she whispered. The debt, the pressure, seemed like the only way out. There is always another way out, I replied. You could have told me about the debt. We could have sold the house, used part of the insurance money legally. I would have helped you. You would have controlled me just like you always did, she retorted, a flash of the old bitterness returning. You would have dictated how and when I could use the money. I sighed, realizing it was useless. The distorted version Candace had of me, of our relationship, was deeply rooted in her mind. Perhaps it had always been there, growing silently while I believed we were close. You're going to need help, Candace, I finally said. Not just lawyers but doctors. There's something broken inside you that money could never fix. She looked at me, her face a mask of defeat. And Devin will stay with me, I replied firmly. I will do everything in my power to help him overcome this, to help him understand that what you did does not define who he is. Candace nodded slowly, as if that was expected. You'll be a good mother to him, she said softly. Better than I ever could be. It was the closest thing to an admission of conscience I would see from her that day. The officer indicated that our time was up. I stood up, feeling strangely lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Goodbye, Candace, I said, looking one last time at the woman my daughter had become. I hope you find peace someday. I turned my back and walked toward Devin and Wallace, who were waiting for me by the ambulance. I didn't look back as the patrol car drove away, carrying Candace to a future of trials, sentencing, and I hoped treatment. Devin ran toward me as soon as he saw me, hugging my legs. Are you okay, Grandma? I crouched down, meeting his eyes. I am, sweetie. Are you? He nodded gravely. I'm sad but relieved. It's weird to feel both at the same time. No, my love. I smiled, moved by the emotional maturity of this extraordinary child. That is perfectly normal. In the days and weeks that followed, we faced the bureaucratic and emotional whirlwind that followed the event. Statements to the police, preliminary hearings, and consultations with child psychologists for Devin. The media tried to turn our tragedy into a sensational circus, but we managed to maintain some privacy thanks to the sergeant, who protected us as much as possible. Candace was formally charged and was awaiting trial in pretrial detention. Her accomplice, Marcus, made a plea bargain, providing details that only solidified the case against her. Preliminary psychiatric evaluations suggested a severe personality disorder, exacerbated by financial problems and long-standing resentments. Devin and I temporarily moved into Wallace's apartment until we could find a new house, a fresh start away from the grim memories of the old residence. Devin's therapist said he was adjusting surprisingly well considering the trauma. His resilience was remarkable, although there were nights when he woke up screaming, haunted by nightmares. On one of those nights, as I calmed him after a particularly bad dream, Devin asked me the question I knew would eventually come. "Grandma," he said, his voice small in the dark room, "why did Mama want to hurt us? Didn't she love us?" I sat on the edge of his bed, searching for the right words, how to explain something so complex and painful to a 7-year-old. "Devin," I began slowly, "your mama is sick, not like when someone has the flu or a stomachache. It's an illness that affects how she thinks and feels. It makes her see the world in a distorted way." He absorbed this in silence, his eyes reflecting the weak light of the nightlight. "She did love us," I continued, "in her own way. But that sickness made her make terrible decisions, decisions that healthy people wouldn't make. Is she going to get better someday?" he asked, his hopeful voice breaking my heart. "I don't know, sweetie," I answered honestly. "Some people with that illness get better with treatment. Others don't. What I do know is that you are safe now. And I love you more than anything in this world." Devin nodded, seeming to accept that explanation for now. "I love you too, Grandma," he said, hugging me. "Thank you for believing me." "I will always believe you," I promised, kissing his forehead. "Always." We stayed like that for a long time, embracing in the dim light, grandmother and grandson, united by a bond that betrayal and danger had strengthened instead of broken. Eventually, Devin fell asleep in my arms, his breathing becoming deep and steady. I watched his relaxed face in his sleep, marveling at his courage, his perception, his capacity to love despite everything. The day Devin tugged at my arm in the dark airport parking lot, pleading for me not to go home, he didn't just save our lives. He taught me the most important lesson of my life. That sometimes the deepest truths come from the smallest voices, and that wisdom isn't the privilege of age. I was 70 years old when I learned to truly listen, and thanks to that, I now had the chance to watch my grandson grow up, to help him overcome the trauma, to build a new life with him where trust and love could flourish again. As I watched him sleep, I made a silent promise that I would spend the rest of my days honoring the courage of that little angel who, with a simple plea, "Grandma, believe me," had changed everything. The road ahead would be long and sometimes painful. There would be more nightmares, more difficult questions, more tears. But there would also be laughter, discovery, and shared joy. And above all, there would be truth between us, the most solid foundation upon which to rebuild our lives. The sun was beginning to rise, sending the first golden rays through the blinds. A new day, a new beginning. I adjusted the blanket over Devin and, careful not to wake him, slipped quietly out of the room. In Wallace's small kitchen, I made a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching the city wake up outside. I thought about all the mornings to come, all the days Devin and I would have together. I also thought about Candace, alone in her cell, confronting the consequences of her choices. The pain was still there. Probably always would be. But alongside it, something new was growing: hope. Hope that one day Devin could look back and see not only the betrayal that almost cost us our lives, but also the moment he found his voice and his courage. Hope that together we could transform that terrible night into the start of something beautiful, not an end. Because deep down, that's what mattered, not how stories begin but how we choose to continue them. And ours, mine and Devin's, was just on the first chapter. You know, when I think back to that night, I realize something powerful. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. I spent 70 years believing wisdom only came with age, but my 7-year-old grandson taught me how wrong I was. Trust doesn't always come from experience. It comes from love, from really listening. Life gave me a painful lesson, but also a second chance to rebuild, to love deeper, and to protect stronger. So if you ever doubt someone close to you, pause, listen, and look into their eyes. You might just find the truth waiting there. If you agree with me and liked my story, show it by sending a like to the video. Let's see how many we are. I'm curious from which city and at what time are you listening to me? Write it in the comments. If you'd like to support my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. There are 2 new life stories on screen that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one to start listening now. Love. Her eyes flew open the moment she saw me standing there. You! She hissed, venom dripping from the word. How in the world did you get away? You should be 6 feet under after that fire. There wasn't any fire, Candace, I stated, trying to sound as even as possible, even though my heart was pounding. I took another step closer to her. The police officers around us got a little tighter, but they didn't jump in. They knew I was just trying to buy us some time. Your whole scheme fell apart because Devin happened to overhear everything. He's the one who saved our necks. Candace's face contorted in a way that was just awful to see. A crazy cocktail of fury and utter disbelief. She glared over at Devin, who met her gaze head-on, not flinching a bit. You, she breathed, barely a whisper, to her own son. You turned against me. He didn't turn against anyone, I said, continuing to inch forward. He was just protecting the person he cares about, the same way I've always tried to shield you from harm. She let out a laugh that was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and almost hysterical. You suffocated me. You were always trying to run my whole life, control my money, crush my dreams. When Dad passed away, that money should have been mine. The money was never the issue, Candace, I said, doing my best to keep my voice calm even though I felt like I was about to have a heart attack. Your father wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet, not be dependent on some inheritance. He loved you. I love you. That's a lie, she screamed, her hand shaking so badly that I thought she was going to drop the gun. If you really loved me, you would have given me what I deserved. Right then and there, I knew that nothing I said was going to get through to her. Greed and bitterness had eaten away at her mind for so long, maybe even decades. She'd become someone I barely recognized anymore. Just let Devin go, I begged, my voice cracking a little. I was only a few feet away from the porch steps now. He doesn't have anything to do with this. It's just between you and me. For a split second I thought I saw something flicker across Candace's face. A little bit of hesitation, maybe even a tiny spark of guilt. It was like she was actually considering what I was saying. But that's when Devin made his move. Quick as a whip and catching everyone completely by surprise, he bit down hard on the arm that was holding him, then twisted and rolled off the porch. Everything happened in a blur. Candace screamed out in pain. The gun went off, the bullet flying harmlessly up into the air, and cops were suddenly swarming the place from every direction. I took off running the last few steps to the porch, ignoring the officers yelling at me to stay back. All I could see was Devin, huddled up tight next to the railing, shaking like a leaf. I got to him at the exact same moment the police officers tackled Candace, wrestling her to the ground and slapping the handcuffs on her. She was screaming and fighting, and the look on her face was just pure, unadulterated fury. I wrapped my arms around Devin with every ounce of strength I had left, feeling his little body trembling against mine. He was alive. He was safe. Thank God he was safe. Grandma, he whispered, clinging to me like I was his lifeline. You came. I will always come, my love, I choked out, the tears finally starting to flow. Always. Over Devin's shoulder, my eyes locked with Candace's as they led her away. For one heartbreaking moment, mother and daughter just stared at each other, separated by this enormous, unbridgeable gap that had opened up between us. The rage was gone from her eyes now, replaced by this desolate, empty look. The woman I knew, my own daughter, seemed to have vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. And then she was gone, bundled into the back of a patrol car. I shut it all out and just focused on Devin, on the absolute miracle of having him right there in my arms, safe and sound. The sun was high in the sky now, bathing my grandson's tear-streaked face in warm light. I gently brushed his hair back from his forehead, just marveling at how brave he was. "How did you even know she was planning all of that?" I asked softly, once we were both settled in the ambulance that had arrived to check us out. "How did you figure out her plan?" Devin gnawed on his bottom lip, lost in thought. "I always wake up early, Grandma. Mama thinks I'm sleeping in, but I just lie still in bed and think about stuff." I smiled and stroked his cheek. He was always so observant, picking up on every little detail. "That morning I overheard her talking on the phone," he went on. "She sounded different, like she was angry but trying to hide it. So I went out to the hallway and listened at the office door. The paramedics finished checking Devin's vitals and gave us a little privacy, moving off to the side to talk to the police. She was talking about the gas and about us being asleep." Devin lowered his voice, and then she said she wanted Grandpa's money, and that she was tired of waiting, and that it was going to look like it was just an accident. He looked straight at me, and his eyes seemed so much older than his 7 years. I knew that no one would believe me if I told them. Adults never listen to kids when it's something important. That last sentence just broke my heart into a million pieces. How many times had he tried to warn me before, with little comments or observations that I had brushed off as childish fantasies? "But I did believe you at the airport," I reminded him softly. A tiny smile flickered across his face. "Yeah, you believed me when it really mattered." I hugged him tight again, overwhelmed with gratitude for this amazing little boy whose incredible instincts had saved us from certain death. The sergeant came over to us, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Devin, you and your grandma both need to go to the hospital to get checked out," he said. "We'll need to take your statements afterward, but that can wait for a while." I nodded, so thankful for his kindness. "Candace," I said, hesitating, still struggling to wrap my head around what my own daughter had become. "What's going to happen to her?" "She's facing some very serious charges," the sergeant replied, keeping his voice down so Devin couldn't hear all the details. "Attempted aggravated murder, kidnapping, illegal possession of a firearm, and a whole lot more. With the accomplice's testimony and all the evidence you've gathered, it's a pretty solid case." A wave of deep sadness washed over me. Not for the Candace of right now, the one who had pointed a gun at me and used her own son as a shield, but for the little girl she used to be, the daughter I had raised with so much love and care. "Can I see her before they take her away?" I asked, surprising even myself. The sergeant hesitated, studying my face. "Are you sure that's what you want?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I need some kind of closure." He nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do, but it'll have to be quick and we'll need to supervise." I turned to Devin, who had been watching us intently. "Sweetie, I need to talk to your mom for just a minute. Do you think you'll be okay here with Mr. Harrison?" Devin hesitated, and I saw a flash of fear in his eyes. "She's not going to hurt you again." "She won't," I promised him. "There are police officers everywhere. We're safe now." Wallace, who had been standing quietly by our side the whole time, stepped forward. "We'll be right here, buddy. Your grandma will be back before you know it." Devin nodded reluctantly and let me walk away. The sergeant led me over to one of the patrol cars that was parked in the shade of a tree. Candace was sitting in the back seat, handcuffed, her eyes staring blankly into space. When I got closer, she slowly focused on me. The fury had disappeared, replaced by an immense weariness and something that almost looked like shame. "Can I have a word with her?" I asked the officer who was guarding her. He nodded, opened the car door and stood watchfully next to me. "Candace," I said, my voice sounding stronger than I thought it would. "Why? Why did you do this?" She held my gaze for a few seconds before looking down at the floor. "You would never understand," she mumbled. "Try to explain it to me," I urged. "I owe it to Devin. I need to understand how you could even think about killing your own child." A wave of pain washed over her face. I wasn't going to," She trailed off as if she was realizing how ridiculous it sounded. At first it was just about you, the insurance money, the house. I was drowning in debt, Mom. More than you could ever imagine. And Devin. She swallowed hard. Marcus said that we had to include him, that 2 deaths from a gas leak would be more believable than just one, and that if only you died, the police would suspect me right away. Her voice broke. I tried to tell him that we could just send him away to boarding school or something like that. But Marcus insisted it was all or nothing. And you agreed? I said, not really asking a question but just stating the awful truth. Candace didn't say anything. Her silence was more damning than any confession she could have made. Do you even realize what you've done? What you almost did? My voice was trembling now, barely holding back the flood of emotion. Devin is going to grow up knowing that his own mother plotted to kill him for money. What kind of scar is that going to leave on him for the rest of his life? Tears started streaming down Candace's face, but I couldn't tell if they were real tears of remorse, or just selfish tears of self-pity. I wasn't thinking straight, she whispered. The debt, the pressure. Felt like it was the only way out. There's always another way out. I snapped back. You could have told me about the debt. We could have sold the house or used some of the insurance money legally. I would have helped you. You would have just controlled me like you always do, she retorted, the old bitterness creeping back into her voice. You would have told me how and when I could spend the money. I sighed, knowing it was hopeless. The twisted version of me that Candace had in her head, the way she saw our relationship, was so deeply ingrained that there was no way I could change it now. Maybe it had always been there, growing silently in the shadows while I just naively believed that we were close. You need to get help, Candace, I said finally. Not just lawyers but real doctors. Something is broken inside of you and money will never fix it. She just looked at me, her face a blank mask of defeat. And Devin is going to stay with me, I said firmly. I'm going to do everything in my power to help him get through this, to help him understand that what you did doesn't define who he is. Candace nodded slowly, as if that was exactly what she expected. You'll be a good mother to him, she said quietly. Better than I ever could be. It was the closest thing to an admission of guilt I would hear from her that day. The officer gave us a signal that our time was up. I stood up, feeling strangely lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Goodbye, Candace, I said, taking one last look at the woman my daughter had become. I hope you can find some peace someday. I turned and walked back toward Devin and Wallace, who were waiting for me by the ambulance. I didn't look back as the patrol car pulled away, carrying Candace off to a future of trials, sentencing and hopefully, some kind of real treatment. Devin came running toward me as soon as he saw me, wrapping his arms around my legs. Are you okay, Grandma? I crouched down and met his gaze. I'm okay, sweetie. Are you? He nodded, but his face was so serious. I'm sad but also relieved. Feels weird to feel both at the same time. Oh, my love. I smiled, so touched by this amazing kid and his emotional maturity. That's perfectly normal. The next few days and weeks were a whirlwind of activity statements to the police, preliminary hearings, and consultations with child psychologists for Devin. The media tried to sensationalize our tragedy, but we managed to maintain some privacy, thanks to the sergeant who did everything he could to shield us. Candace was formally charged and was held in jail, awaiting her trial. Her accomplice, Marcus, made a deal with the prosecution and gave them all the details, which only strengthened the case against her. Preliminary psychiatric evaluations pointed to a severe personality disorder, made worse by financial problems and long-standing resentments. Devin and I moved into Wallace's apartment temporarily, until we could find a new place to live, somewhere that didn't have the same awful memories as the old house. Devin's therapist said that he was adjusting remarkably well, considering everything he had been through. He was incredibly resilient, but there were still nights when he would wake up screaming, haunted by nightmares. One night, as I was trying to comfort him after a particularly bad dream, Devin asked me the question that I knew was eventually coming. Grandma, he said, his voice small and shaky in the dark. Why did Mama want to hurt us? Didn't she love us? I sat down on the edge of his bed, trying to find the right words to explain something so complicated and painful to a 7-year-old. Devin, I started slowly. Your mama is sick, but not like when you have a cold or the flu. It's an illness that affects how she thinks and feels. It makes her see the world in a way that isn't right. He listened in silence, his eyes reflecting the dim light of the nightlight. She did love us, I went on, in her own way. But her sickness made her make really bad choices, choices that healthy people wouldn't make. Is she going to get better someday? He asked, and my heart broke at the hope in his voice. I don't know, sweetie, I said honestly. Some people with that kind of illness do get better with treatment, but others don't. What I do know is that you're safe now, and that I love you more than anything else in the world. Devin nodded, seeming to accept my explanation for now. I love you too, Grandma, he said, hugging me tightly. Thank you for believing in me. I will always believe in you, I promised, kissing his forehead. Always. We stayed like that for a long time, grandmother and grandson, holding each other close in the darkness, bound together by a love that betrayal and danger had made even stronger. Finally, Devin drifted off to sleep in my arms, his breathing becoming deep and even. I watched his relaxed face in the soft light, just marveling at his courage, his insight, and his amazing capacity to love despite everything. The day that Devin tugged on my arm in the dark parking lot at the airport, begging me not to go home, he didn't just save our lives. He taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned, that sometimes the biggest truths come from the smallest voices, and that wisdom isn't something that just comes with age. I was 70 years old when I finally learned to really listen, and thanks to that, I now have the chance to watch my grandson grow up, to help him heal from this trauma, and to build a new life with him, where trust and love can grow and flourish. As I watched him sleeping, I made a promise to myself that I would spend the rest of my life honoring the courage of that little angel who, with one simple plea, "Grandma, please believe me," had changed absolutely everything. I knew that the road ahead would be long and hard. There would be more nightmares, more tough questions, and more tears. But there would also be laughter, new discoveries, and moments of shared joy. And most importantly, there would be truth between us, the strongest possible foundation for building our new lives. The sun was starting to come up, sending its first golden rays through the blinds. It was a new day, a new beginning. I gently adjusted the blanket over Devin, and then quietly slipped out of the room, careful not to wake him. I made myself a cup of coffee in Wallace's small kitchen and sat down at the table, watching the city slowly come to life outside. I thought about all the mornings ahead of us, all the days that Devin and I would have together. I also thought about Candace, alone in her jail cell, facing the consequences of her actions. The pain was still there, and I knew that it probably always would be. But alongside it, something new was growing: hope. Hope that one day, Devin would be able to look back and see not only the betrayal that almost cost us our lives, but also the moment when he found his own voice and his own courage. Hope that, together, we could transform that terrible night into the beginning of something beautiful, not just the end of everything. Because, when it comes down to it, what really matters isn't how our stories begin, but how we choose to keep writing them. And our story, mine and Devin's, was only just starting the first chapter. Looking back on that whole night, I had a powerful realization. Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that tell the biggest truths. I spent 70 years thinking that wisdom came with age. But my 7-year-old grandson taught me just how wrong I was. Trust doesn't always come from experience. It comes from love, from taking the time to really listen. Life gave me a tough lesson, but it also gave me a second chance to start over, to love even deeper, and to protect with every fiber of my being. So if you ever find yourself doubting someone close to you, just stop, take a breath, and really listen to what they have to say. Look into their eyes. You might just find the truth you're looking for, right there waiting for you. If you agree with me and you enjoyed my story, please click the like button on the video. Let's see how many of us there are out there. And I'm curious to know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to support my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you so much for listening and for spending your precious time with me. For more stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel and please subscribe. There are a couple of new life stories up on the screen now that I'm sure you'll find interesting. Click on one and start listening now. Love.